if you need to use the toilet. Are we working now?
I think so, yeah, we're good.
Yeah. Okay, then all it leaves me to do is to introduce Beth Singler, Research Associate at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. Mind out of place, thinking about AI, apocalypticism, anthropologically. Good luck, Beth.
I get it wrong too. Good morning. Thank you everyone for turning up after last night's dinner as well. And to new people who may have joined us as well, thank you. In this keynote today, I will address 4 separate issues. I will not do these extensively, so don't worry, you won't be here for 2 hours. Firstly, I want to address the question of why arts and humanities scholars, particularly religious studies scholars, should pay attention to artificial intelligence. This might be slightly preaching to the converted, but I think there's some important aspects that we should draw out that are relevant to apocalypticism. See, another word I also struggle with. I will discuss AI apocalypticism. I shall start again. Apocalypticism. Maybe I just say AAI. And formulate what I would describe briefly as an anthropology of anxiety. I would explore the concept I want to call mind out of place as a thought in that anthropology of anxiety, and I'll present a case study that will already be slightly familiar because we've already had Ray Kurzweil mentioned a few times, but I'm going to draw out some of the ways in which his ideas have been disseminated, what kind of impact they've had as well. So, firstly, AI as a technology is potentially disruptive for society and entangled with that contemporary religion. Second, AI as an aspiration or ideal is potentially reinvigorating for contemporary religion, leading to new religious movements and resurrecting older religious tropes for use in people's accounts of an AI-influenced future. And thirdly, AI in some accounts as a potential new intelligent or sentient being raises questions about personhood. And this is an area of debate that various religions have held dominion over historically and may well see themselves as called upon to provide definitions, perhaps re-sparking interest in religious views as well as internal discussion in religious groups. So in terms of socio-economic impact, contemporary forms of AI, even long before the eschatological predictions of the so-called prophets, such as Ray Kurzweil, Motherboard called him a prophet in 2011, are realized. AI will have effects on socio-economic presence. We've discussed some of these yesterday, but I have some other examples here as well. Some of this is framed in terms of disruption, a marketing term to a certain extent. So, for example, a survey of 2,700 executive managers and business analysts by Deloitte found that 45% saw AI as the technological exponential that would be most disruptive to their businesses and industry. The second highest response was augmented or virtual reality at 14.8% in 2015. Disruption can be another marketing term leveraged to make claims about how the transition to gig-based work or a sharing economy is revolutionary, whereas in practice newer models of employment can empower existing forms of corporate structure and enforce the capitalist system. AI in all its constituent parts has, however, been implemented into various platforms and systems that impact real-world choices. And again, we spoke a little bit about social media yesterday. I think this quote highlights some of the issues, that the more is known about us, the less likely our choices are to be free and not predetermined by others. With regards to political influence, this manipulation of narratives during elections has arguably had direct results on success or failure of candidates, and there's a lot of issues around that in revelations at the moment. Some political candidates may campaign on a platform of employment, but automation raises hard questions about the future of work. Increasingly, AI allows for a future where intellectual labour by humans can be taken over by smart machines. Parallels with historic industrial revolutions sometimes ignore this intellectual replacement, deducing that because humans have previously found other employment and survived the upheaval of technological change that pushed them out of handcrafting jobs in the early factories, that they will again create new, as yet unthought of jobs. However, while not all jobs are physical jobs, all jobs are thinking jobs. A post-work future has a potential for greater socio-economic upheaval than the sharing economy that precedes and enables it, where employment moves towards less certain and more gig-based structures. In terms of religion and work, religion does not exist separately to these concerns and shifts, even if the focus of religions can be represented by themselves as metaphysical or eschatological and not temporal and this worldly. Those religions already working with practical theologies, political theologies, or theologies of liberation may already have doctrines and models for dealing with the social changes that result from technological advances. However, the scale of these social changes might be where such models fall down. For example, the impact of automation on human employment and therefore self-determination, motivation and ambition will necessarily raise the question of what is the human being for. Those religions that have answered this question in terms of a relationship with a deity have still enabled that relationship to be manifested in terms of employment, both actual labour but also employment in tasks, for example, prayer, curation of ideas, pursuing art for the deity's sake, or pilgrimage. The idea of even these religious tasks being automated is not so far-fetched when we take into account the existing variety of methods for prayers to be expressed and to operate at a distance to their human originators, such as Tibetan prayer flags, or the presence of votive statues of worshippers at Mesopotamian temples dating almost 4,500 years back. In 2017, a robot priest, I think already mentioned, Bless You Too, was unveiled at Wittenberg at a celebration of the 500 years since Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in the town. We wanted people to consider, says the demonstrator this, if it is possible to be blessed by a machine or if a human being is needed. Bless You Too was just intended to provoke debate, according to its creators. But in a potentially post-work future brought about by AI and automation, the question of what a human is for has the potential to have very real impact on how religion and society interact and maintain each other. So we have a quote here from Weber, and Weber's Protestant ethic in 1905 was one of the factors, he argued, that led to the development of the spirit of capitalism in the Christian West. But in that time, the religious underpinnings of that spirit were lost. But in time, the religious underpinnings of that spirit was lost, and we have been led into an involuntary servitude to mechanized industry, according to Weber. Weber's presumption of a future shaped by secularization and mechanization seems to lie in accord with the expectations of those secularists looking forward to technological exponentials and advancements in AI. But this is perhaps a dismal future, and for Christianity in particular, who, according to Weber, contributed to the conditions necessary for the emergence of capitalism and technological advance only to be extinguished by them. This brings me to the second reason why the interplay of religion and AI is significant for the study of contemporary religion. AI as a reinvigorating factor for religion, playing into the concept of charisma that Weber also considered. In the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, Weber was admittedly looking at a very specific interaction between religion, quite narrowly defined, and society. He hadn't really explored this concept of new religious movements while also allowing for them in his definition of charisma and the prophet. Even without applying the specific formula of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism that Weber was outlining in all international contexts, involved the interaction of religion and society, and both are influenced by advancements in technology. Thus, it is necessary that any consideration of AI and religion recognise a variety of contexts, especially when the rate of development of the technology is different in different countries. The idea that AI can lead to new religious movements has historical precedents. Just as new technology can provide new models for how the human body works, for example, as seen in the adoption of hydraulic metaphors for explaining the human psyche in Freud's interpretation of dreams, it can also provide models for how the cosmos works, and can therefore consciously or unconsciously inspire religious formations based upon that conception. In the case of the very first seances, such as those of the Fox sisters in New York, whose accounts of contact with the deceased Charles B. Rosner in 1848 inspired the spiritualist movement, the wrappings of the spirits were analogous with the long-range communications with others granted by the telegraph. By 1852, the telegraph in the United States involved 20 companies and 23,000 miles of wire. More recently, the development of the internet has had an invigorating effect on holistic interpretations of the universe, especially among some New Agers who have made claims about networks of telepathically linked individuals communicating and sharing in that holistic cosmos across a net, as they have called it. With AI, we have seen a shift towards the use of analogies for the brain in particular, and the universe more widely, in terms of computers, data, information, and more speculative substances like computronium. The latter, I think, has similarities with other hypothetical substances from earlier eras of scientific development, such as phlogiston, seen by chemists as a product of combustion until the chemical revolution of 1772 to 1789. These analogies for the brain have also led to speculations about the future shape of religion, such as dataism, presented in Yuval Harari's Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow from 2015, which relies very heavily, obviously, on the data analogy. Moreover, these technological kinds of perceptions of the human and the cosmos have led to more intentional religious movements focused on AI and transhumanist ideas, such as the Christian Transhumanist Association, the Mormon Transhumanist Association, both forming obviously from existing religions, the Way of the Future, the Order of the Cosmic Engineers, and the Turing Church of Transcendent Engineering, which emerged from the Order of Cosmic Engineers. The Turing Church explicitly outlines a plan for theism from deism, emphasizing that the march towards AI is a part of their move to go to the stars, this is a quote, and find gods, build gods, become gods, and resurrect the dead from the past with advanced science, space-time engineering, and time magic. Admittedly, the OCE has declared itself to be an unreligion, building upon anti-religion rhetoric seen amongst other rationalist groups interested in transhumanism and AI. However, envious of the successes of other new religious movements with a focus on technology such as the Realians, they thought that they should perhaps take lessons in charisma from them and other groups and improve their appeal. So in this quote, the conclusion that the irrational aspects of the Realian cult are exactly what makes it appealing seems difficult to escape, but we shouldn't give up yet. We have been so far unable to market our ideas to wide audiences in a way that is emotionally and aesthetically appealing, but I think that we can do much better. The future success of such AI-inspired new religious movements is uncertain. The Way of the Future only became a prominent example of this trend because of papers that it filed in May 2017 with the IRS, partly to claim 501c3 tax-exempt status, which named engineer Anthony Lewandowski as dean of the new church, and his notoriety for being at the centre of a legal case between Waymo and Uber over their self-driving cars led to more press attention for the church. Details about actual membership, one possible metric of success, but admittedly not the only one, are very limited. The Church's expressed desire to focus on the realization, acceptance, and worship of a Godhead based on AI developed through computer hardware and software might be understood as more explicitly religious than the OCE's unreligion, raising the question of whether the OCE or the Turing Church can really be called a new religious movement. Or perhaps the avoidance of the term and the use of unreligion is a hangover of anti-religion discourse still prevalent in secular and muscularly atheists' understandings of the impact of AI or the singularity on the future of religion. Religion as an object is, however, still involved in the discourse of these AI-inspired, convictions-based organisations, as they sometimes call themselves, in effect perpetuating the relevance of religion in contemporary debates. And finally, AI, in this section, AI raises questions about personhood. This is where religions have primarily had contact with questions around AI and its impact, as my ethnographic research shows. In my interactions with Christian theologians on the subject of AI, there has been an emphasis on questions around how AI can be understood in relation to Imago Dei. Interpretations of being made in the image of God broadly fall into three categories: substantive, functional, and relational. Lawrence Tamatia further argues in a 2008 article that contemporary Christian responses to AI in relation to Imago Dei are elaborated primarily through the substantive and functionalist approaches. That is, they focus on the substantive similarity of the human to God in terms of our similar capacity for reason, or the soul that is breathed into the human by God. And therefore they can make a strong distinction with the machines which have only been made by only man-made reason and therefore no souls. Or they draw attention to the dominion function of the human made by God and see machine dominion as only resulting in end-time scenarios as humankind tries to play God. However, I have also seen elaborations based upon the relational interpretation of Imago Dei as laid out in Noreen Hertzfeld's typology. Drawing upon Martin Buber's account of how we relate to existence, either in terms of an I-thou or an I-it connection, some Christian theologians put AI in the category of an it, something we can either use or experience, and further, something that can only be made rather than born as humans are. Further, treating an it as a thou, a being that can have a relationship with the I, is seen as a dangerous step that allows us to apply personhood incorrectly and therefore behave inappropriately in our relations with human-made artifacts. Christian concerns about companion robots are partly about the disingenuousness of the corporate product or sexual ethics, but also about how such relationships diminish our own humanity in giving an aspect of personhood to the non-person. From an anthropological and historical perspective, there is criticism to be made here on the basis that the restrictive label it can be, and certainly has been, applied for ideological and political reasons. In previous eras, many intelligent groups now considered to be fully persons were treated as much less than that. For example, women and indigenous peoples encountered an exploration and expansion by predominantly Christian cultures and countries. Groups with their rights still in contention, such as the LGBTQ+ community, or even animal species showing reason and intelligence, demonstrate that this conversation over personhood is ongoing and may one day include intelligent machines. Debates on the online forum Reddit Are Christianity, no, I've had that up, that's the one I want, also touched on similar topics, with the debate around whether a robot could have a soul, occasionally recognising how complex the topic was and how it might be of ongoing relevance. So I think the middle quote, the dead horse topic of the 22nd century, I have foreseen it flogging a dead horse. This will be a topic that we keep going back to. And then finally, at the bottom, it's LGBT all over again, relating it to the same sort of questions that have arisen around rights for those groups. Apocalyptic AI can be a response to these issues underlying these three reasons that I have now been discussing, that religious studies should consider AI: socio-economic change, religious reinvigoration, and questions around personhood. Anthropology serves as a method to consider anxious responses around apocalyptic AI. Perhaps, though, we need a specific anthropology of anxiety to see how apocalyptic AI is both expressed and is formative of people's worldviews. And what should that anthropology of anxiety do? That one. It should pay attention to incidences of fear and anxiety. That's a descriptive method. It should therefore follow on to describe what shapes these fears take, including repeating patterns or localized changes. It should demonstrate awareness of cultural influences on these incidents. And in the case of AI, this means awareness of both science fiction and science fact accounts. And the lines between those are very blurry. Worth exploring first where our conception of anxiety comes from in recent history, when the field of psychology has arisen and conjoined with biomedical explanations of trauma. It would be a failure not to refer to the influence of Freud on this history and our current conceptions of anxiety, as in this quote, where he describes suffering, the worst being perhaps or the most painful that comes from our relations with other man or mankind. In the case of AI fears, we might see this as a part of a hypothesized external world, but we might also see in transhumanist accounts a reaction to anxiety raised through the body's decay and dissolution, in Freud's words. And arguably sentient interpretations of future super AI might be understood as anxiety arising from our relations to other beings or men, in Freud's account. In the biomedical field, the work of George Krill in the 19th and 20th centuries gave us our current conceptions of fear, including the fight or flight or freeze response, and initial definitions of post-traumatic shock disorder. His summary that fear is the memory of pain was based upon his understanding of fear's role as an adapted advantage in evolutionary schemes. His work, combined with Freud's, led to the modern understanding of anxiety as the capacity to imagine pain and not merely to recollect pain. In the case of AI apocalypticism, this model might bear out. The imaginations of future pain are certainly key to their descriptions, and therefore perhaps also key to their anxiety-producing effects. But none of these imaginings of future pain make any sense devoid of cultural context. In the history of psychology, there has also been attempts to place anxiety within cultural context, looking specifically at the cultural determinants of anxiety symptoms. So culture in this psychological context usually refers to race or ethnocultural groups. For example, statistical accounts of differences in rates of phobias in different racial groups in a set location, or a cross-national study involving surveys in the US, Canada, Puerto Rico, Germany, etc. There have also been considerations of the impact of socio-economic factors in either reporting or not reporting anxiety. However, ritual and culture preoccupied with avoiding pollution can be misdiagnosed as OCD in this psychological approach, and some definitions have been very culturally specific and untranslatable. There are recognized forms of anxiety that are believed to occur only in specific locations. So, for example, my Japanese pronunciation is terrible, but Taijin Kyofushu, disorder, show of fear, Kyofo of interpersonal relations, Taijin from Japan. So in psychology, the recognition of fears explained by and connected to religious worldviews and beliefs are possible, and anthropology might draw from this. So, for example, the Druze, predominantly found in Syria, who believe in previous incarnations that affect their current physical appearance, and also in their phobias for children who are then told that their fear of water relates to their previous lives. Obviously, we can make some sort of deductions about parental narratives here as well, but it's important to see that cultural relationship. Reincarnation is, however, a speculation about the past, although it can be projected into future activities, when we are thinking specifically about speculations of the future. Anxiety about future events. When anxiety is described as excessive worry or apprehension about future events, it appears to be preeminently a disorder of emotional or psychological distress, says Kermeyer. Teasing apart the relative contributions of social, personal, and physiological processes in such complaints requires careful assessment, drawing on both biomedical and cultural expertise. And as anthropologists, or as I am an anthropologist, we are not all anthropologists here, I would try and supply some of this cultural expertise in discussions of anxiety related to AI. So my approach, my ethnographic fieldwork, has involved in interacting with AI focus groups, so singularitarians, self-proclaimed singularitarians, transhumanists, technologists, both on and offline research. There's some examples there of some things I've been up to, going to various countries, to Japan, America, technological exhibitions that I've been to, paying attention to accounts in the media, and also social media accounts by individuals. Finding people who are scared of artificial intelligence, the singularity or superintelligence is not difficult. Here are some examples of fear tweets. If you can't read these, people saying things like, can you believe there are people who aren't scared of AI and the concept of the singularity? This is why I'm scared of Siri, Robopocalypse, hashtag Robopocalypse. I'm genuinely scared of AI and the singularity. And this is perhaps not surprising. There is a recursive effect of the press on people's apprehensions of the future of AI. I have an entire folder on my laptop of every single time I spot a newspaper article that has the Terminator in it, and here's just a small sampling. In Terminator in the fiction sense, rather than in the press sense, Skynet sees us as a threat, and that's why Judgment Day itself is a preemptive strike. Judgment Day is also a movable date, as attempts to change the future work only so well. Destiny is at hand in the fiction. But not all motivations in fiction for the Robopocalypse are the same. In the 2017 film Singularity, the AI Kronos again considers humans to be the greatest threat, as Skynet does, and initiates again nuclear destruction. But the scientist Elias Van Dorn, who invented Kronos, uploads himself and his associate, that's John Cusack and his associate there, into the AI itself, thus giving themselves immortality, and they can hang around after the near annihilation of humankind and guide the new AI-based civilization. Another example from fiction, The 100, which actually takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where 4,000 humans exist on a space station with scarce resources. The decision is made to send 100 of their most problematic juvenile prisoners, send the teenagers, down to Earth to see if it is still habitable. They're expendable. ALIE, either Ali or ALI, appears in the second, third and fourth seasons. Though the acronym ALIE was never explained on the show, the writers considered Applied Lucent Intelligent Emulator. Ali's core command is to make life better for mankind, but her deduction is the only way to make life better for humankind is to reduce the number of people that there are. Again, she launches a nuclear strike. AI really likes nuclear strikes in science fiction. It seems like a common theme. The decision is therefore meant to be for our common good. And it might be worth making a link, and I'd like to draw out as many links as I can between science fiction and themes and narratives, between Ali and the Matrix films. Ali also, she's there, you can see she's wearing a red dress. In the Matrix films, there is the woman in the red dress who's a simulation. But unlike the 100, the multiple AIs behind the apocalypse in the Matrix films and associated media do not wish the best for humanity, even if their approach is ill-conceived, as Ali's is. The robo-apocalypse of the Matrix universe is not only through nuclear war started by humans to attempt to wipe out the rising machines, but also through the reduction of human beings to batteries. None of this can be possibly spoilers. It's the Matrix. It's really old. From birth, the human is penetrated by the apparatus of the machines. The importance of body horror in apocalyptic scenarios should not be ignored, and something else that we describe and draw attention to. Just as I drew a line between Freud's idea of anxiety emerging from the decay and dissolution of the body and transhumanist hopes and fears around immortality, the non-consensual taking over of the human by the machine, as opposed to an intentional transhumanist cyborgism, haunts anxieties about the AI apocalypse. The penetration by the machines in the Matrix is, however, not purely just through the body. It is also penetration of the mind. The Matrix itself is that simulated world where the humans' minds are occupied by a sort of okay world, while their bodies power the machines. I say sort of okay because the human minds rebelled against a utopian existence when the Matrix was first initiated, knowing that it could not be true or what they truly deserved. It says a lot about human beings, or at least their interpretation of it in the Matrix films. Simulation theory, invigorated by science fiction films such as The Matrix, also provides fodder for AI apocalypticism and anxiety. There is the fear, such as in this tweet, I'm not sure how clear it is, I can always read it. There's the fear here that we are not really real, as in this tweet. So it says, I can't stop, this is the same person all the way through, I can't stop thinking about how we're living in a simulation. I have spent the past few days trying to notice glitches in the system. I think glitches might come up yesterday as well. How do I tell my mum I need to leave uni because I'm a simulation and nothing matters because I'm a simulation? I actually did talk to my mum about the simulation theory today and she just said I scared her. I scare you, I scare me, I'm not real. This is the kind of panic that you can sometimes see, and people getting into a hole of watching videos about simulation theory and not really finding a way out. In Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream from 1967, we're presented with a torture scenario. He's clear that this torture of the humans in his story is physically happening. The few remaining humans and their bodies are completely under the control of the malevolent supercomputer known as AM or AM. This control and their near undying nature makes their experience close to the all-controlling simulation of some apocalyptic narratives. So in brief, AM or AM, which has changing meanings, first allied master computer, then adaptive manipulator, and then finally aggressive menace, was originally created to run the world war more efficiently than humans could, before killing off all but 4 men and 1 woman. In an endless underground complex, the 5 are endlessly tortured. The descriptions are vivid, and this story has inspired forms in other media. So, for example, there's a graphic novel there and a computer game. I'm not sure how clear the computer game words are, but it says, "What hellhole did that godless machine put me in this time?" And obviously the words of the name of the computer, AM, evokes God imagery as well with I am, and he says a godless machine. So there's some sort of religious connections there in the description and the understanding of the science fiction. The inscrutable motivations, the obvious intelligence, and the non-human existence of AM are an example of what I would term mind out of place, an idea I want to explore now in my anthropological consideration of AI anxiety. So here I'm drawing on Mary Douglas's concept of matter out of place, that is, dirt and its associated impurities. In Purity and Danger, she thinks through examples of what dirt means in many cultures and deduces that identifying dirt is about symbolic boundary maintenance more than mere practicalities of avoiding the contamination. That things do not fall neatly into categories are problematic. Things that do not fall neatly into categories are problematic and disturbing and need to be dealt with. Likewise, the later work of Julia Kristeva, which considers abjection and horror and considers what disturbs identity, system, order, what does not respect borders, positions, and rules. So I think there's a way of describing AI as mind out of place and therefore dangerous. I propose that abjection-based reactions to advanced AI can be a response to this mind out of place. The horror is a part of the disturbing effect of seeing an aspect of ourselves elsewhere, and therefore the viscerality of some AI anxieties are important. It can also be a rejection of mind reflected back inaccurately, the sense that the AI is a mind that doesn't work quite the same way as ours. It can be a reflection of the Turing test. The idea of passing for another in the Turing test has its roots both in gender obsolescence fears as well as more general replacement worries, but it also involves an attempt to present intelligence or mind as located in another and intrinsically links intelligence in the artificial other to the negativity of disingenuousness. However, existing cosmologies of beings might refute this fear of mind out of place, and it is worth reminding ourselves and those studying the future of AI that mind is contextually recognised. In various cultures, the acceptance of the other than human person exists. This expression, other than human persons, was used by anthropologist Irving Hallowell to describe the cosmology of the Ojibwe. I'm going to say that wrong, Ojibwe. In this, humans, as well as animals and some rocks, trees and storms, are considered to be relational, intentional, conscious, and communicative beings. Thomas Blackburn did ethnographic research with the Chumash Indians. He described them as having a cosmos formed of an interacting community of sentient creatures. Considering artificial intelligence raises the idea of further kinds of intelligence being received as persons within new cosmologies. One such typological example might be Murray Shanahan's description of what he terms conscious exotica, as existing within an array of beings with varying human likeness and consciousness likeness. So if you can follow this graph, human likeness increases on one axis, capacity for consciousness on the other, and he places today's robots and AI low down on the capacity for consciousness, but also low down on human likeness with the potential to expand as human level AGI improves. Animals are there as well, but he identifies this space for conscious exotica with greater consciousness likeness, but not increasing human likeness. So it would not necessarily appear human-like, but it would have something around similar consciousness level. My main problem with this graph, I think, is that the subjectivism of the placements isn't really taken into account, whether we could actually identify these groupings without having our tendency to anthropomorphize at play. So he would place, he has done previously, not in this graph, AlphaGo at near enough 0, on human likeness and capacity for consciousness. But I've encountered people who place it much higher than that just through their kind of folk understanding of what AlphaGo does and what it can do. Drawing again on anthropological observations, we could place such conscious exotica, according to Murray, like us but not like us, into the framework of liminality introduced by Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner. Originally referring to the in-between stage of ritual, liminality has come to be applied to beings who do not fall neatly into established categories, much like dirt in Mary Douglas's work. Creatures fulfilling mystical roles are often identified as liminal. Having the ability to transcend categories is thought to parallel the ability to transcend the norm. So, for example, the Sphinx, part beast, part human, gateway keeper and puzzle setter. The ghost, moving between the worlds and sometimes imparting knowledge. The centaur, bestial and wise, but also rapist and teacher. AI transverses categories as well, between the natural, our mind, and the artificial, our mind in other places, and between the born and the made. It's not surprising, perhaps, then, that connections between AI and Frankenstein's monster are drawn, and we saw some of these yesterday. And with this year being the centenary of the book, there are more and more events making this connection. I'm speaking at a couple next week. You might have heard of the Uncanny Valley. Masahiro Mori's concept of Bukimi no Tani Gensho, sorry, my Japanese pronunciation is terrible, illustrates our moments of ick with regards to the nearly but not quite human. So, for example, here's the graph that illustrates the Uncanny Valley becoming more human-like and familiarity levels change. We need to note our visceral reactions to the embodied forms of AI. Some scholars make an evolutionary argument as to why we would react in this way, such as avoiding disease, of being close to the not right human who might be unwell. Is our reaction more than that, though? Is there something disturbing about mind in places other than humans? This is perhaps more than a wider cosmology of beings and closer to a leap into a space when we are not the only sentient appearing beings. Alien mythologies are perhaps also a result of this uncanny feeling. Is existential risk and AI fears the result of mind out of place? AI is a kind of new mind present in the made, the initial ick, but for others perhaps an initial yes. Existential risk fears about mind out of place and out of control are also applicable here too. So Bostrom's idea of the supermind or the superintelligence, mind accelerating to a point beyond us, can lead to this feeling of disturbance. The technological singularity, which is not merely just mind out of place, but mind beyond almost all understanding in some interpretations, leading us feeling without stable categories and adrift. Apocalyptic fears might be more about mind disobeying, but my work involves an anthropological consideration of these dissemination of narratives, tropes, and themes, and therefore we can see where these shapes are forming and how they are affecting people, which draws me on to my final point, the case study about Ray Kurzweil. I can probably skip some of this because we did have a discussion a little bit of him yesterday. If you've not encountered him before, I will do a very brief introduction. So he born in 1948 and he may well never die, according to his approach to life and immortality, including writing books such as the 10% Solution for Healthy Life and focusing on what kind of medical and therapeutic methods we might use to live forever. I want to talk specifically about The Singularity is Near from 2006, where he lays out his concept of the technological singularity. This draws on earlier ideas of his where he talks about the exponential growth of AI power and at what point certain milestones will be broken. I mean, he predicted being able to beat humans at chess in 1992, and he bases this all on this concept of the law of accelerating returns, like technology is getting faster and faster, better improving itself, or we are improving technology at a faster and faster rate, leading him to the conclusion that singularity will take place in 2045. Again, this is also drawing on Moore's law, this idea of accelerating returns, and I think probably people have come across this before, so I won't go into it too much, but I like this graph and I do keep using it because it's out of date. So we were meant to surpass the brain power of a mouse in 2015, that hasn't happened. So it's nice to point out where we've predicted things and they haven't happened as well. Of course, this draws on earlier ideas, but he adds a sort of a more aspirational, teleological, eschatological aspect to this accelerationism. I don't think Moore ever expected that his graph would be extrapolated upwards, really, to think about the singularity, the sort of almost transcendental moment. So I've highlighted some parts from The Singularity is Near here, which both gives this idea of the change in meaning that this acceleration will bring, and also the self-declarations of singularitarianism, that some people will actually ascribe this as a way of thinking about their own lives and their ways into the future as well. So he does draw on older representations of the singularity, not always with credit. So John von Neumann in 1958, Moore's law I mentioned, Good's ultra-intelligent machine, mankind's last invention, the self-perfecting artificial superintelligence, Hans Moravec from 1999, and Werner Vinge, who traverses that line between science fiction and science fact that sometimes gets blurred by writing science fiction as well. And of course, there are connections to older accounts as well that also are sort of ahistorically erased in some of these interpretations of the singularity. So Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest who discussed the noosphere, and as well as the curve of evolution, an exponential graph of consciousness developing. Russian cosmists who don't always get credited in singularity theories. Scientists, philosophers, theologians who also foresaw an advanced stage of evolution connecting humanity to the cosmos. Julian Huxley, who described the first use probably of the word transhumanism, man remaining man but transcending himself by realizing new possibilities of and for his human nature. And of course we can draw links to other teleological schemes and eschatological hopes and fears in religious worldviews. Here I'm going to concentrate specifically on Kurzweil's singularity because I think his impact on discussions of the singularity is more readily apparent than some of these other and earlier accounts from Moravec and so forth. Examples of responses in 2006 to the publication of The Singularity is Near are interesting because they highlight several themes. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but the one I'm particularly interested in is the top one where it says, reality is not and will not anytime soon be a William Gibson novel. A rejection of this idea that the singularity is going to parallel science fiction and actually that we need to be a bit more realistic. He says, if you believe, or this individual says, if you believe you are going to live to see this kind of stuff, I've got a bridge to sell you, which is a reference to the selling of an old London bridge to a landowner in Arizona for an exorbitant amount of money for a bridge that was only going to be destroyed anyway, including something like $7 million just to transport it across the oceans. I like this connection to science fiction, but also the questions of credulity and incredulity and how we respond and how we're affected by these accounts. Examples of personal effects, specifically of Ray Kurzweil's singularity theories here from tweets. So again, fear, people being scared. It scared me half to death. Sad face emoticon. To be really scared, read Kurzweil's predictions. Kurzweil wrote The Singularity and people laughed. I got scared to see he now works for Google. Ugh. So concern about the singularity and specific reference to Kurzweil. And at the top left I like as well because it's interesting to see someone thinking about their future at 14 based on Kurzweil's singularity interpretations that he thought, or this person thought, in the future, at 14 he thought in the future he would already be exploring the universe, being a hypermind, or otherwise I was losing hope. So his future destiny, he thought, was predicated on this idea of the singularity. And the interplay of singularity thoughts with science fiction can be drawn out. I've mentioned the film Singularity. There was a separate film project to that earlier with Roland Emmerich, who you may have heard of, who makes big blockbuster films. He was working on a script called Singularity. He brought Ray Kurzweil on to work on that specifically, and it didn't get off the ground. So we never got Ray Kurzweil's science fiction film, which is a shame. And then the emergence of his ideas in memes and memetic culture, some in parody. So obviously one does not simply mock Ray Kurzweil on r/futurology as a replay of the Lord of the Rings meme. In 2035, all memes are about the singularity, the hive mind kind of obsolescence of variation, and of course the Star Destroyer and Ray Kurzweil saying destroy. Parody memes sharing the idea further, though we see the dissemination. Arguably, the impact of Kurzweil's singularity theories and how they have been transmitted is a reflection of a cult of personality. So, for example, we've got some demonstrations of how he's been represented. The holding up the sign, the singularity is near, is obviously a reference to like street prophets. And he's been, as I said, called a prophet in Motherboard. And the front cover of Wired there, he's getting all the publicity in the press. If you can't make out the bottom left image, that is a scale of, as someone pointed out to me, white men, a scale of people's opinions from the let's hold back from the singularity all the way up to Kurzweil, let's go for it full throttle. So you've got Stephen Hawking, sadly passed away, right at the beginning, then Bill Gates, and goes onwards up to Ray Kurzweil is presented as the optimum singularity enthusiast. So you could describe this as a cult of personality. However, I'm inclined to ascribe charisma in the Weberian sense more to ideas than individuals, and the prominence of Kurzweil is more to do with the effective nature of his singularity, I think, than his personality in particular. We have seen that this is not entirely original. It draws on obviously earlier sources, but it has a narrative that some have found individually affecting and sometimes life-changing, as in some of the tweets I described. Joshua Rawlinson, in his book on singularities, describes how the singularity is very much grounded in the present. The concept relies on a need for explanatory narratives in the audience, the author's own concerns, and reflects current aspirations and anxieties. Also, singularities theories provide prophetic commentary on where we are now and where we are going. It is therefore important to pay attention to popular conceptions and where the narratives have gone and been taken up, remixed and reformed, to identify these conceptions of the present and the future and how they are spread. So in conclusion, I might let this run before I do my conclusion because it's worth seeing. Okay. It'll just start again. You can just ignore it. In conclusion, the apprehension of mind in beings other than humans, and specifically in AI and embodied robotic forms, means both the feeling of the uncanny or the danger that Mary Douglas recognised in relation to dirt, and that feeling of danger combined with assumptions of agency means that the end of the world is a possibility. That reflection of ourselves provided by the fractured mirror of AI shows us who we are and who we think we are not. Rebellion, as in the robo-apocalypse, is an idea from the natural freedom of minds we think minds should want, just as we do. Finding mind out of place is a step towards anxiety and therefore the apocalyptic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. Questions for Beth? Questions?
Stunned or disappointed silence?
Okay, I'll start off.
Okay.
Question that's not
Wait till I bring your microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. You touched on almost every base. One you didn't touch on, though, is that in something like 13 billion years, as far as I'm aware, the number's probably wrong. It might be 12 billion, it might be 30. The sun will expand so large that it will wipe out the planet, all human life, all our descendants. The human race will be no more. And God knows whether God will still have an existence or a purpose. I tend to think not. Doesn't worry me at all.
Okay.
Why, in this context, should we be worried about what you've been talking about when actually it's all going to come to that final end?
Well,
I think it's worth thinking about that, actually.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, my argument is not that we should be worrying about this. My argument is that people are worried about this. Why then are people worried about this and not worried about the heat death of the universe or the explosion of the stars? Well, I think partly because it's dated closer. Even if you completely disagree with Kurzweil, he gives you the figure of 2045. And for some people, younger people as well, that's on the horizon to a certain extent. And they can extrapolate from current technology, even if incorrectly, to see that this is a direction that perhaps some people want things to go. So they have Kurzweil telling them this is a direction that things are going in. They can see the development of weaponized AI. They can see the insinuation of AI into their day-to-day life. They recognize these things. And I say they, I'm including myself in that they. I recognize these potentials. And the narrative of the singularity ties those potentials up together and provides you with either a dystopic or a utopian future. And I think also, I wouldn't just dismiss fear of anything as insignificant. I think fear plays many different roles in people's lives. And I think there is something to be said for the role fear plays in a sort of self-entertainment as well. And I don't think that's a dismissive comment. I think people go on roller coaster rides for very specific reasons and they enjoy that experience. They go back on and they feel it again. So when you find people who've lost themselves in hours and hours of YouTube videos about simulation theory or singularity theory or existential risk, they are pursuing a feeling that they it's not pleasurable perhaps, but it's something that's engaging in a particular way. So I think it's the evocative nature of the description, the science fiction that backs up. We don't have much science fiction about the stars exploding and our planet just being destroyed, but we have tons of science fiction about how robots will kill us, how the future will look with robots, what could go wrong, what could go right, and that gives them narratives to draw on, images to draw on, and there's a sort of historical, mythological precedents as well, and that all builds together in a way that I don't think stars exploding or the heat death of the universe or any of those things really have the same evocative power.
Okay, let's start with Mustafa.
Okay, so apart from the unbearable whiteness of the people generating this narrative, there's some of the other players that I think are important to bring in, people like Peter Thiel, so right-winger, Christian of some form, incredibly wealthy, and also involved in projects like seasteading. So, you know, you can entangle with that whole science fiction narrative, the whole water world scenario. But then also bringing in other incredibly rich white males like Elon Musk, who I think there was a recent Eon magazine article. I can't remember the title of the piece, but I know the opening statements was "fuck Earth."
Yeah.
And being provocative, not me, Elon Musk being provocative. Why? Because I'll hedge my bets, and if the Earth goes to pants, well, there's always Mars.
Yeah.
So, although this doesn't speak to the scenario of the ultimate heat death of the universe and the sun collapsing, etc., and I completely agree with your point about proximity and extrapolation from not near future technologies, but currently existing and deployed technologies. I mean, I think about when I saw Terminator 2, which was 1992, something like that. And I watched that as a doctoral student at Brunel University, and I came back and I gave a talk in the AI department about that. And now we're seeing drone technology deployed in northern Pakistan. And it's not being deployed on Western populations. These are all being targeted in the non-white world. I mean, we can talk and worry about Amazon and drone technologies being sold in curries and that kind of thing. But this is a completely different deployment of the technology in terms of its weaponized form. I mean, Peter Singer's written a whole book about this, Wired for War. So, you know, if you could just maybe speak a little bit about these other players like Musk and Thiel and the other strands to the narrative outside of the immediate AI context.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what else to add after to your comment. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously this is being driven by technological entrepreneurship in a way that we didn't have in the 80s and 90s or 70s, when AI development was mostly driven by government agencies, DARPA, etc., and the failures of expectation from the 1950s Dartmouth College Convention on AI, that, you know, they said they would have human level intelligence over the summer, they'd fix that, and then that follows into the 70s and 80s with failures to live up to what DARPA was expecting, and we get the AI winter scenario of the funding dries up. We're now in what might be a perennial AI summer because of this entrepreneurship and the funding that is being driven by people's desires to recreate the world in specific directions, not in the way that DARPA, which I'm not saying is a completely neutral organization in its aspirations, but it didn't have this goal of science fiction futures in the same way that perhaps Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, they want to see the world shaped in a particular way that suits their hopes that they might have had since they were teenagers and they first started working in technology. That is a big concern, and I don't think anyone's unaware of that at the moment, that these are the driving factors, and that this technology being driven by aspirational people like Elon Musk could be reformulated and reworked another way. So Google's in trouble at the moment because of their scheme to develop technology in a particular direction. About 300 of their workers have signed a petition saying, please don't, this is not what we signed up for. So awareness of that is very important. I don't see that always drifting down to the kind of the tweet level that I've been examining of people's singularity fears. They do cite people like Kurzweil more than they ever talk about Elon Musk. But I think people know that corporations are working on the technology now. I don't think that's unknown, and where that technology might be applied is very, very concerning.
So on that question of anxiety, two questions. One, is this Freudian mastery, right? I mean, Freud talks about people who've undergone trauma, then trying to reenact their own trauma because at least they feel like they're in control now, right? So on the one hand, I'm wondering whether you think that's what's happening if somebody projects these kinds of anxieties online. Are they just trying to get comfortable with them? And the other is, I'm wondering how frequently, if artificial general intelligence pops up on Reddit, how quickly and to what kind of enumeration do people start expressing anxieties as opposed to rejoicing in the future to come?
So to the first point, yeah, I absolutely think thought experiments, science fiction are ways of playing out scenarios, including the ones that you feel uncomfortable about, and habituating yourself to them to a certain extent, but then also occasionally trying to find the new hit of like, you know, I've kind of got myself settled on this, like what's the next scary scenario? So you see escalations like that as well. So to people who I see accounts of them saying, well, I tumbled into this YouTube cycle of, I watched all the videos on this, and then, someone comes along and suggests a new video that has a new part to that story, that narrative, and they get very excited about, here's the other aspect I could fall into on that as well. So I certainly think that's true, although it's worth remembering with Freud. I mean, I mentioned Freud because of his influence, not necessarily because I entirely agree with his approach. Freud's method was derived partly as an occupation. That was his job. His job was to get people to go over their past, so he could fix them, but also so he could create psychotherapy as an institution that he could work in, basically. So we should bear in mind that regurgitation of anxieties has a purpose specifically for Freud and the culture around him at the time. And your second question, I've slightly drifted away from. I can't remember. Can you just remind me what you? It was really just about reactions.
Numerical frequency.
Yes. No, I don't work quantitatively specifically, so I'm not necessarily there tracking response times. I kind of the 2006 forum boards. I turned up later, a few months back, and started reading through them and seeing what kind of response times there were time tagged, and what kind of directions the language was going in, and that they flow from both sides of the spectrum of yay to nay. It really is very individually dependent on what that person's response to the topic is. So it's not all fear. There's obviously utopian responses as well, but I was quite interested in the affective element.
I was just wondering about Kaczynski. Kaczynski, right? The Unabomber you did mention.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering how much of that kind of sort of gung-ho, let's kill some people to prevent the apocalypse happening is going on within that community.
Yeah, because that's the Terminator plot, isn't it, really? It's the good warriors have to make the bad decisions to deal with the future that they don't want. And that kind of narrative obviously turns up in the Unabomber. Sorry?
He really killed some people, right?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to imply he's just saying that. Yeah, he definitely did. There was an incident at, where was it? Someone, I can't remember where it was, but people were pushing over automated cars not too long ago as a kind of pseudo-Luddite reaction to this kind of idea of automation as a whole. I haven't seen much in the way of threats of violence against persons yet, but I suppose that's hypothetically possible. It happens in science fiction. The film Transcendence, with Johnny Depp playing almost Stuart Russell as an AI scientist at Berkeley, he's poisoned by an anti-AI organisation, and he slowly dies. Sorry, spoilers. To anyone who hasn't seen Transcendence, it's not actually very good. He's poisoned, dies over time. It gives them enough time to upload his mind, and then he basically becomes the Singularity. He transcends, as he prefers to call it, rather than Singularity. So that narrative is out there. If we start seeing that, that would be quite concerning. That people, but I think what we do see more immediately is movements like effective altruism, which talks about focusing charitable giving in effective ways, the most efficient ways, and some of the debate on those kind of forums is around whether we should be giving any money to national or international aid or just spending it all on AI research, because the superintelligence, when we get to it, can fix all our problems. So therefore we shouldn't spend any of our money elsewhere. And that's the most logical reasoning to save as many lives as possible, is to spend it all on AI. So you could argue that, that would have terminal outcomes potentially for people who received funding before, and now it's all going to develop artificial intelligence. That could be a concern.
We have time for one more, if anyone. Over here.
It's probably more a comment. It struck me while we were presenting that both pain and anxiety are probably the most common problems, most common medical problems we have today. I think recently I read an article, I don't remember the numbers, but in the US, 44% of the population are on Prozac. Mm-hmm. And a similar number, not as high, but a very, very high percentage of people in the US, especially white male people, are on painkillers, on morphines. And maybe we are already in a place where these signs of anxiety and reactions to this development are being suppressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a valuable observation, that generally, culturally, it's being registered that we are in some sort of form of an anxious age. Or is it that we have more ways of registering and diagnosing that now? So some of the things like Prozac that are being handed out now and showing that as evidence, perhaps, we didn't have that before. Sorry, it's a very noisy computer. So yes, there is that argument. I think The Guardian just ran a piece about how today UK's youth is now the most unhappy generation. And you can look to specific socio-economic factors for that happening, specifically in the UK, and changes, and I'm not going to go on a diatribe, but changes in the universities and housing and employment, and automation can only contribute to that. And perhaps, yes, all these factors bubbling away underneath perhaps come out in kind of more far future-ish eschatological concerns. As you can't maybe fix the present, you start thinking about what the future starts to look like if you can't fix the present, or if you can make the future better by this big leap moment of the singularity. Is a way of kind of escaping what's happening at the moment, saying, well, in the future the singularity will happen and it'll fix everything, or it'll change everything, or will be uploaded, and it won't matter that we can't afford houses to live in because we won't have bodies. So perhaps that's one way of thinking about it. I think that's a valuable point.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Let's take a coffee break.
Yeah. Thank you.